And so we have about 4 of the funders from California River Parkways, and Jen Rice and we walk up over the top of these rocks, look over at the encampments, and a man stepped out of his tent. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning, gave a big yawn and waved his hands up like this, and he was completely naked. So Jen and I looked at each other and said, this probably isn't going to work out very well.
Eureka's waterfront evolves over a long 150 plus year period. So, it used to be at the very beginning pretty limited and modest, and then it really grew up pretty quickly through the 1860s, 70s, 80s. A lot of wooden structures on the waterfront, big warehouses changing to industrial and fishing, and then more modern architecture, modern design. And the waterfront has changed significantly since the 1850s.
Pretty fortunate to have been involved in a lot of the waterfront reconstruction projects. I managed quite a few projects. We constructed demolished the old boat basin and reconstructed that. We demolished the old waterfront and built the boardwalk, and we also built the Bisque building, which is behind us. And so I've had a lot of intimate interaction with the waterfront in the last 20 years. So I've been pretty fortunate to see kind of the city's vision of kind of reinvigorating the waterfront. Bonnie Gould had a statement. She used to say that Eureka's waterfront should be its front door, not its back door.
When I first came to the city of Eureka, waterfront revitalization was a big thing for the city and the city council. There was a newly elected mayor, Mayor Nancy Fleming, and one of her things was to revitalize the waterfront and bring people back to their bay, Humboldt Bay. And her vision was to create public access along the waterfront. And that was to build upon work that had been done in the 1980s. Councils of the 80s saw that they wanted, again, to bring the public back to the use of their waterfront.
Every generation, thinks that they're the ones who came up with ideas, but as much gray hair as I have, all the way back in the 70s, folks were talking about coastal access and coastal trails, and that conversation really heated up in the 1990s, and RCAA was part of that, people like Jen Rice.
So in 1996 at RCAA, my boss at the time, Steve Madrone, was helping the county kind of reboot the Hammond Trail. So it had a bit of it had been developed and then kind of sat, and I think it was kind of given up on because it was hard to get all the pieces in place. So he went out and got grants and started building more of the Hammond Trail. And so I was a worker bee on that project. And so I could see the potential and how excited the community was about having more of a trail system there. And then at the time I also had a mountain bike that I rode to commute. And because I rode a bike, RCAA team gave me a project that they were funded by the Air Quality Management District to do a plan for bike facilities that was community driven instead of written by local governments, that so that there was more community interest and voice in that plan, and to create a bike map and to do some counts of how many bicyclists were out there on the streets. So because I didn't really know that much about active transportation, bicycle planning, transportation planning. I just held a bunch of community workshops all over the county. And there was a group in Blue Lake who wanted to talk about the Annie and Mary Trail, and I had a workshop there. And a high school kid from Eureka rode his bike to Blue Lake to go to that meeting because he was so fired up about this idea of regional trail system. And he said, I have a trail for you that I want to show you in my town, Eureka. I have a vision. And so I said, sure, cool. He said, yep, meet me at the time, Montgomery Ward's, which is where Target is now, on your bike Saturday morning, and we'll ride this trail route that I want. So he took me, and we actually started on the other side of the highway, where now the trail starts at the Harley-Davidson kind of site. We started over there, and we rode the whole waterfront. And this high school kid, his name was Nathaniel Von Kelso, he said, I want Eureka to have a waterfront trail. And he showed me in a few little places where some plans mentioned pieces, like the boardwalk piece. And there was the piece at the Adorny Center that had happened. But there was no bigger plan for the whole thing to happen. And so I said, wow, boy, we just finished this plan for Bay Trail and some bike facilities, and this seems like, yeah, we should include this and pursue this. So that started the kind of process of thinking of this whole 6.5 mile Eureka Waterfront trail as a one unified trail system. It was really the vision of a high school student who came to somebody who cared and was talking to the community about it. And so I ended up hiring him. And he created the bike map for Humboldt Bay and helped do some of the initial planning for this trail project. We formed a committee at the city, trail committee, and he was the chair for a while. A lot of other people were involved in that committee, people like Connie Miller and Zaretti Gooseby and Rick Littlefield.
In 1999, when we first started on the subcommittee that City of Eureka had for developing a trail system, I was still the owner of Eureka Natural Foods at that time. Yeah, the Waterfront Trail Committee was the brainchild of a councilwoman at the time, Connie Miller. And she had a vision, along with a number of others, that for active living and to develop a trail that would circumnavigate the city. At that time, we talked about a waterfront trail.
The Trails Committee was an idea that Jen Rice brought to me when I was on council. Jen Rice is the doyen of trails in Humboldt County. It's been her passion forever, and she knew that the city of Eureka needed to buy into the concept. And so I brought it to the council, and we voted on it, and it was approved. And a group of people were appointed to a Trails Council to keep things alive in front of the city.
First thing that we did was to look through the general plan that had been developed since the 1970s and look for any references to pedestrian access, to trails, to active living, and we compiled all those into a kind of a document that for the half a dozen of us that were on the city's committee. And so a lot of these ideas had been in the general plan for the city since the 1970s, but had never been acted on really. Early along, Humboldt Bank, which used to own the big parcel out where the Harley-Davidson property is now, Humboldt Bank owned that whole thing. Well, Humboldt Bank got bought and they were selling off that property, and at the time I was on the committee that was looking at where these trails might go, and so I went and talked to their real estate guy, and we convinced them that when they split that property, to split off the wetland property, which they were going to do anyway because you can't develop it, and we convinced them to keep the road that was part of the old RV park, which had been abandoned for many years, as part of the wetland parcel. And there were two reasons that that would be good. It would accommodate a future trail if it ever was able to happen, but it also would provide a very clear line of where development could happen. So they could develop right up to the trail with no questions asked and no environmental studies and all of that kind of thing. So it actually was very helpful both ways, and thankfully the bank did take that suggestion and they did subdivide that so that the trail that you go on now from the health clinic that goes along the RV park was actually dedicated by Humboldt Bank back in the day. And then at the same time, we had this fantasy of being able to go from the Target Trail, which we were, with the help of Supervisor Bonnie Neely, they incorporated a trail into their design under pressure.
Montgomery Ward was demolished and Target started building on that site. And there wasn't necessarily yet a formal plan in place by the city for this trail, but I knew it was going to happen at some point. And I knew that if that Target got built on the edge of the bay like they were planning to do, we would never have a trail through that site. So I just started telling them, you've got to include a trail in your plan. I know you can't see it right now where it's going to connect, but it's going to happen. And you have to include it in your project. And so getting the Coastal Commission to require that as part of the project, and then getting city staff to be on the team that advocated actually for the trail. At the time, there wasn't yet a champion, on city staff. So I ended up having lots of kind of nasty letters back and forth with Target to get them to do the trail. Luckily, I think it was really that the Coastal Commission got involved and required the trail, made it happen, but that almost didn't happen. And so that last little piece would have been, a brick wall.
They did incorporate it, and it sat there for many years, just this little isolated stretch of trail. But at the time, we had this fantasy idea of being able to go under Highway 101. Well, when you go under there now, it seems like, oh yeah, no problem. But in those days, it was like, oh, you're going to go under the highway with a trail, wow. And there was plenty of room for it. And, to their credit, Caltrans was receptive to the idea, even back in those days.
Funders started getting interested. We started getting more detailed plans in place. Then later, the Trails Committee developed a city plan for the trail in 2005. And then it kind of sat in inboxes for a long time. And I think, my role as working for a nonprofit, I didn't work for a government. I didn't have the authority, to move these projects forward. And at the time, none of the local governments had really strong champions. I mean, the city was focused on the boardwalk, and they did the boardwalk. And I think the role that we played at that time was just listening to the community. In some agencies, we were being told multi-use trails will never happen here. It's, and when I heard that from, people running local agencies, when they said, multi-use trails are never gonna happen. I don't know why you're spending any time or energy on this. I was all, well, I think I just got my mandate.
The biggest challenges for me as manager through this decade and a half of processing with the trails was, councils change and councils have different priorities, and keeping the trail as a priority for the council and not having them become distracted for all the other things that go on in the community.
Another challenging piece was just all those years of there were committees and groups trying to kind of form around how to help the trail happen, but it wasn't quite happening, And so I think just before that lesson learned about before there's an actual champion, who's gonna drive that project or that process inside the jurisdiction where it needs to happen, it's gonna be tough to make it happen. So I think a lot of folks spent a lot of time and energy before that was in place and got frustrated and said, I'm out, I'm done, I can't keep pushing this. I'm not quite sure why I could, but maybe because I'm a Taurus. But and I just knew that it was nobody's malicious intent to stop it necessarily, or it just, all the pieces weren't quite in place for it to be successful to happen.
It was a little bit of a hard sell to the council at the time. The whole idea of trails hadn't really caught on nationally the way it has now. And so when we'd talk about trails, people would say, well, what do we need trails for? They've got sidewalks already.
And you were walking in areas that really people hadn't been to much. It was marshy, it was just an area that people hadn't been to. So at that time you're kind of going, boy, can this really happen? Are people going to go there?
It was kind of a muddy track and not very well known to the community. And so I think a lot of people could see the possibilities when that trail went in. And that was partially due to, I would say, the Coastal Conservancy being an active partner in helping the community develop that trail system, because they kept coming back and saying, we're ready, are you? Can we help you find other funders? What else do you need? And it was folks like them coming regularly, asking the city, so where is the project? Where is it in process? Is it moving along? And folks like Melvin McKinney, Cappy McKinney, who would call me and the city every month from probably like 2003 to 2010, and or just about that long, saying, where is it? What's happening? Is it moving? So, I think that community members creating that vision and then never letting it die, and moving it until there was someone, inside to take that vision forward and make it a reality. Laid great groundwork for now in the last few years. Miles Slattery, who was that champion that came into the city, at some point and said, why haven't we done this already? Let's do it.
I don't know if I'd say I was a champion or anything like that. I hate to say it, I'm gonna be honest, I really think it was my ignorance. I didn't think that there was, it was more like, okay, this is something that you have to do, go and do it. It was, kind of my naivete of saying, this is what I was tasked with doing. And I never thought of, whether elected officials wanted it to happen or whether other people wanted it to happen. My boss said, this trail is something that, we're gonna start developing. And so we started working on it. I don't think that, the political climate and those type of things were ever anything that I've considered back then, nor do I consider now. I think it's more of bringing in those projects that I think are best for the community and that I think that the community wants. So here we are on the Hikshari Trail, on the southern part of the Hikshari Trail. What's interesting about this part of the trail here is that this is one of the first permitted trail crossings for the NCRA that was allowed by the NCRA. Back in 2006, 7, 8, when the Bay Trail Committee was meeting all the time, there was a lot of contention about, what we can do with the railroad corridor now that the railroad wasn't here. There were those that were adamantly opposed to doing anything with trail related in the corridor. And eventually, with a bunch of organizations, RCAA and other organizations had discussions with the NCRA, and they developed the Rail with Trail guidelines. After that was developed, this was one of the first sections in Humboldt County that allowed for a trail crossing to come in across the NCRA's corridor here. At the time when I first came in, Gary Bird was our special projects manager, now our wonderful personnel director. He was the one that was commandeering kind of the Elk River Trail, was what it was called at the time, which is now the Hikshari Trail. But he was the man behind the scenes dealing with that portion of the trail, and was also the staff member that was involved with the Trails Committee that did the Waterfront Trail and Promenade recommendations.
Okay, my role in the Waterfront Trail project started in about 1999, 2000. I was an environmental programs manager, and I was assigned as the first staff liaison to the newly formed Trails Committee. I believe the committee was formed in 1999, and the job at that time was to initiate the process of developing a trail along the waterfront through Eureka.
So my role at that time was just kind of get familiar with it. I think that there were plans for Gary to do other things, and I think that once I started as a project manager for Public Works, that they saw that I could have potential in helping with some of these kind of environmental programs type of work, whether it's the trails or the solid waste management stuff. And so I was kind of just brought in as I guess, an apprentice to Gary to figure out what he was doing at the time and then eventually take over those responsibilities.
I think anytime you have a project that lacks dedicated funding, you're always concerned about the ability to make that happen.
Well, I think the biggest turning point was the CEQA. I mean, a lot of the grant funding that we were looking at was dependent upon the CEQA being complete.
So CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, and most of the time people just call it CEQA. CEQA says this, CEQA does this, like it's a person. But really what it is a way to inform the public about a project and how it's going to affect them, how it will affect their environment, all the good things and the bad things, and what's being done to make sure that all of the repercussions of that project are being addressed in a good and reasonable way for the future.
You know, even when you're doing ecological restoration work or kind of feel-good public service work, you know, like building a trail or multimodal transportation that you think is a good amenity for the public that doesn't really have negative environmental impacts, everything has impacts. And so even though I'm a restoration ecologist, I've come to accept that I'm a developer, just like as if I were building a Costco or a Target. And what we develop are trails. And so this Hikshari section of trail had a few wetland impacts, meaning the trail crossed over some little tiny postage stamp areas of wetland. And so we had to do a wetland mitigation at 5-to-1. And SHN engineers helped us with the design. And so what you see behind me is the mitigation marsh. If you can imagine, go back 5 years, and if you look at this elevation of grass, that carried across this whole area all the way to as far as you can see in the fog. This was kind of an informal dog park, if you will. And what we did is we came in and excavated it out to a 6.0 elevation marsh, appropriate for pickleweed, and created these little roosting islands, 5 of them in a chain or 4 of them in a chain with little fetches set it at a 6-foot elevation so the tide can come in and have some residence time here.
And as soon as that CEQA was complete, we realized that there was funding opportunities for it. PG&E was one of the first funders for this.
So some years ago when PG&E was building the new Humboldt Bay generating station at King Salmon, we had a mitigation factor. The California Energy Commission requires any new power plant being built in the coastal zone to provide public access to the coast, not necessarily right on site, but nearby. So PG&E worked with the City of Eureka, the Redwood Community Action Agency, the County of Humboldt, and the California Energy Commission, and identified that this trail project was beginning and there was a gap in the funding. So we were able to provide $230,000 to assist with building the Hillficker to Truesdale portion of the trail.
The other section that goes from Pound Road and goes all the way up to Hillficker was a perfect candidate for river parkways, because California River Parkways funds recreational facilities that are along rivers. We had the Coastal Conservancy money. We found out that we were awarded the $950,000 from the River Parkways program, and that the Coastal Conservancy came in and funded all of the Truesdale Vista Point trailhead, as well as portions of the trail just south of there. So their $500,000 that came in at the last minute really made this project complete.
In any trails project, it's you know, you got to get everyone in the trail right away to buy in. So one of the hardest things is to hold all the landowners together, come to consensus that this kind of thing is wanted. And on the Hikshari Trail, we had one particular landowner who didn't want to play in the same sandbox, and so we had to move the trail back out into the street. Create larger distances between power poles with PG&E so that folks could get through there. And Kevin Wright was the project manager for RCA on this Hikshari Trail and did a marvelous job of those negotiations, especially with utilities, can sometimes be a challenge. So the big challenge is holding people together, getting consensus, because just one person can stop a whole project if they don't want to play in the sandbox. So we managed to get around that.
That property is directly across the street from where the fire training facility is on Hillficker. There was always a plan to keep the trail closer to the bay and go straight through that section. This property owner is now no longer with us, and the property owner did not have a very good relationship with the City of Eureka. They had some other issues with the city where the city impose fines on properties, those type of things. And so when we reached out to that property owner, they didn't have any interest whatsoever in selling the property that's there. What's interesting now is that the current owner is one of the relatives of the previous owner, and they're very interested in selling that property, and so there are going to be discussions about potentially purchasing that property so that the trail can go closer to the bay and get away from that section of hill thicker on the road.
I think, you know, the challenge our whole region and community has had with figuring out what to do with the railroad was just a big one, and continues to be a big one, that I think a lot of people have an emotional connection to the railroad and its history here and don't want to let go of it. And it's been rotting away for, 20 plus years now, losing that infrastructure investment because we can't quite figure out what the plan is.
The folks that were advancing the rail activities saw the trails people as adversaries. And honestly, some of the trails people saw the rail people as adversaries. And so we had discussions of rails with trails, or rails or trails with rails, or trails without rails.
Yeah, the struggle, I think, between the NCRA, which is the rail authority who has control over the rail right-of-way, and the trail advocates, that I think initially there was a lot of politics built into that, where the NCRA, their mission is the railroad and bringing and maintaining a rail in on the North Coast. The trails folks wanted to be able to use that same right-of-way to develop a trail. There are as many trail advocates out there as there are harbor and rail advocates. The harbor and rail advocates are a little quieter at times, but on this particular issue, they wanted to preserve the rail right-of-way. They want to preserve the transportation access potential to Humboldt Bay, and it's very important to them, and it's very much an economic driver potential economic driver for our region. So in there was the struggle between the trail advocates and the economic development rails and bay advocates, and NCRA was kind of caught in the middle.
Well, there was controversy over the years as far as rails and trails, or the rail without the trail. And our then President Pete Johnston was very instrumental in talking to and working with the trail people so that they understood the importance of having both opportunities.
Jen Rice and other trail advocates in the region worked with that North Coast Railroad Authority and the operator of North Coast Railroad Authority and developed the Rails with Trails Guidelines. It was adopted in August of 2009. So what's significant about the Hikshari Trail is that the Hikshari Trail is the first permitted example of utilizing the Rail with Trail Guidelines. It established the first rail crossing with a trail on the railroad, and that was the first precedent set by using the Rail with Trail Guidelines here in Humboldt County. Hikshari is the way it's pronounced. It's not really Hikshari according to the Cultural Committee. That was the name of the village that was in the general vicinity of the trail.
I think one of the other exciting, moments in getting that whole waterfront trail developed was, for me, connecting with the Wiyot tribe and asking, if there was a way to start naming some pieces of infrastructure in Wiyot names.
We went and met with the Culture Committee at the Wiyot. We know that this area had a lot of history for the Wiyot. And so we met with the Cultural Committee and had discussions with them about, potential names, what they'd like to see in interpretive signage, those type of things.
Back in 2011, Redwood Community Action Agency received a grant from River Parkways to plan and implement the Hikshari Trail. And I designed a series of entryway kiosks and sign panels for this section of trail, with interpretive content that ranged from Wiyot Way of Life to the new mitigation marsh that went into that area to the formation of the Elk River Sandspit.
It's not desensitizing people, but informing people of what was, what is, and what can be. And that's what this is all. That's what we're all here for. It's to move forward. And so these trails are great because it gives people just a glimpse, not what it was like, because nobody will get there, but understanding where we're at today and what the future holds for us.
Construction was completed in late 2012, similar to our waterfront trail now. People were using it back then. The official opening for the Hikshari Trail was March of 2013.
And I think because the community did so much work for years to say, we want this, we want this, we want this, and all it needed was that spark, you know, really to like make it all fall into place. So RCAA's role wasn't really necessary after the Hikshari Trail piece, because then the city was implementing all the rest of those pieces of trail.
The city and GHD and many of the partners have just been fantastic at keeping that ball rolling. The funders have been really generous with us. And I think the hardest part for RCA has been the very success that we've had. You know, we have been building capacity in the county and the city for building trails. As big trail advocates, we've gotten money for a lot of preliminary aspects of trail building, and now engineering firms, you know, saw that this was a burgeoning area. City has hired staff that's familiar with trails, and so really the hardest part of it is that we've worked our way out of a job. You know, and that's been a little tough, not on the ecosystem, but on the ego system.
The first big piece, and the one that really provided the inspiration, was the Hikshari Trail. And the Hikshari Trail was the anchor. You know, it was the first stretch of trail that actually got permitted and built. So, but getting that first piece was, you know, people could see and they could visualize, oh, this is what they're talking about with the trail. So to me, that was the inspiration for the rest of the trail network.
I think the most successful point was getting phase 1 done. Once phase 1 was done, people could see the importance of the trail, how happy the citizens were. From day one, it was busy. People were down there. It changed the whole thought process towards the trail.
So this section of the trail here is what we call phase A of the trail for development purposes, and some may call it kind of the missing link of the trail. Once Hikshari was developed, you know, we knew there were other grant funding sources for phases B and C, and we were looking at grant funding sources to build this section of the trail. And prior to this trail even being a consideration, there was a big development proposed called the Waterfront Drive Extension. It was a pretty controversial development. The Coastal Commission wasn't behind it. Some other the NGOs in the area weren't behind it. And so from the 90s, they were planning on extending Waterfront Drive from Del Norte behind the mall, kind of along the alignment of Phase A, and then heading out south past Truesdale and hooking up to McCullens, with the intent of alleviating some of the congestion off of 101 with the road through this area. There was about 2 decades worth of planning for that road. Eventually, the elected officials decided to not move forward with that, and so staff went back to the California Transportation Commission and had those funds that were earmarked for that road reprogrammed for this Phase A of the Waterfront Trail. I mean, because of the success of the Hikshari Trail, and especially from the agencies that provide funds for these type of projects, and showing that the city not only received the funding but completed it, you know, well before any expected time frames, I think that the idea of the next phases of the trail were pretty positive. I think that we really thought that there was a great likelihood that we would be able to get the funding for this. At the time of it happening and the Hikshari being completed, it was funny internally because, I wouldn't say funny, I was actually kind of pissed off. It was a change in management in the city, and at that point in time there was a redirection of where that project was going to go to. And it went out of Public Works' purview and went into another department for a short period of time, and that was frustrating, and so from that point of view, we didn't know from Public Works perspective at the time whether it would or wouldn't get done. I did not like it at all when the trail got taken away from me, and when the trail got taken away from our purview, it was to me seemed to be punishing competence. It seemed that it wasn't the right thing to do for the city, and I think that the city was in a worse position if it wasn't in the department that could demonstrate the ability to get the job done. But eventually management changed again, went back into Public Works, Parks and Recreation was created. It was definitely a priority for the department, and at that point in time with the staff that was coming in, there was such a wide range of expertise in Parks and Rec staff. We had people that really were into recreation type stuff and had an understanding of writing grants for disadvantaged communities and those type of things. And then we also had kind of the practical portions of Public Works coming over to, for development purposes. And that combination proved to be a perfect marriage as far as writing grants and getting the money necessary for the rest of the trail.
One of the important parts of the city's general plan was the creation of a waterfront drive that wrapped around from one end of the community to the other to create, again, vehicle access. And staff worked for a number of years at the council's direction on the creation of a waterfront drive from Del Norte to Hillficker. And with the support of funding from Caltrans, the staff made plans and went through environmental review processes there.
There was a lot of resistance to the waterfront drive extension. And I think that staff did a good job talking to the elected officials at that point about maybe looking in a different direction.
There was always a plan for a waterfront drive extension, and built into that plan for the waterfront drive extension was a road that would go from Del Norte, back behind the mall, go past Truesdale, come out at McCullens. Built into those plans was a multi-use trail, which was basically the alignment of where the current trail is now. Other than the trail component of that project, it was not a very popular project with some of the local non-governmental organizations as well as the Coastal Commission. After about a decade or two of working on that project, it was finally brought back to the elected officials. The elected officials said, you know what, we're not going to fight this battle anymore. We are going to table the waterfront drive extension.
My role in development of the waterfront drive had more to do with nurturing the seeds that had been planted, helping the waterfront drive to develop and grow by supporting with my votes, with supporting staff that were involved in it. And I ran on a platform when I ran for council in 2010 where I wanted to see quality of life for Eurekans. And part of the quality of life to me was access to the waterfront. It was also involved with the balloon track at the time, and it was also involved with an extension of the waterfront drive, which later proved to be a non-starter.
Decision by the Eureka City Council while I was on it to change from the waterfront drive extension to the waterfront trail projects, and that was going to be in phases because we didn't have enough money totally, was because the Coastal Commission was not going to approve the extension of Waterfront Drive as an alternative to 101 around Eureka, as well as a picturesque way to look at the bay.
The community was supportive of building a trail, and as was Caltrans. Caltrans was agreeable to use some of the same funding that they were going to put towards the roadway, to put towards the trail development, and we were able to make that transfer both through our local Caltrans office and the CTC higher at the state level. So there was funding made available for those improvements, and that's a big piece of the project.
I think some of the most challenges were the staff trying to find the monies to be able to fund this. But once they got into the right places, they were able to find the dollar amounts that were necessary, but we had to divide it into phases.
The Caltrans has an ATP program, Active Transportation Program. It is an ideal candidate for multi-use trails, providing access to transit facilities providing access, non-motorized access to transit facilities, providing non-motorized access to schools, to commercial areas, and has a high ranking for disadvantaged communities. That was definitely, with all the momentum that we had and all this funding was already in place, we really felt that that was going to be a good grant application to go after for this section. It would really complete the 6.3 miles of trail that would connect all ends of the city, provide it into our commercial district, connect neighborhoods. It really has high competitiveness with all of those criteria that they had in there, and so that was really high on staff's list. And so once we reprogrammed the money for A, ATP was what we were going after. And so we went after ATP and we went for the whole banana, I don't know what you call it, but we went for all of the money. We knew the criteria basically was, like I said previously, was the highest ranking was connecting transit facilities, schools, commercial areas to neighborhoods so that it's active transportation. So in other words, providing a non-motorized route for you to get to and from those essential services that you want in a town, and not having to cross traffic, reduce pedestrian collisions, those type of things are very competitive.
Supplying multimodal transportation to get more and more bicycles off of the 101 corridor, where it's just so dangerous for bicyclers, to provide for people, especially of low income, who bikes is their main way of getting around. You know, completing the Eureka Waterfront Trail and the connections to the, that are up and coming all the way to Arcata is, really a health and safety amenity for the community that's a further gift, besides just connecting people with recreation and passive recreation and connecting them to the bay. It's actually creating community safety.
We put the grant application in. We came back and we were, I think, 1 or 2 slots outside of the funding. We found out that there was a project that the county put in for that was, we felt, not as competitive as ours, and had discussions with them. They were very understanding about how important this was to the city and how important it was for the region, and they eventually pulled out their application. So what happened was we ended up getting, rather than the $4.2 million, because this other project backed out, we received that money. Another project backed out, we received that money, but it didn't add up to the 4.2 that we wanted. So it came in about 2.5 million that we got from ATP. So at that point, we wanted to go out and we needed to find some money. So we went to the Humboldt County Association of Governments, which is a local transportation agency here, Joint Powers Authority. Got $100,000 in TDA funds from them.
There was about $380 million available statewide, and the city's project was the last one in line to get funding. The state actually overlooked the project because the city asked for about $4.4 million. There was only $2.5 available, and they were going to fund another project. But Miles Slattery and I got on the phone and told the state, we want that money. And Miles took it on himself to find the other $1.9 million.
Then use that kind of as leverage for another state application fund for a recreational trails program, and received $500,000 from them. And then went back to Old Trusty Coastal Conservancy, and because of the good relationship that we developed with them on the Hikshari Trail and other projects related to restoration work, we received $1.15 million from them. And so we were able to get all the money necessary to make the project complete. GHD, which was Winslow Kelly when we first started this, but they did a lot of that preliminary design work, and so we leaned on them heavily.
GHD is a consulting firm, and in the initial stages when I was working on the project for GHD, I was working on the preliminary design, identifying alignments, and so the preliminary design and permitting of the trail, basically figuring out where that trail would go, what makes the most sense, and what would be buildable.
Jesse Willer, our current city engineer at the time, was doing the design work for Phase C and finalizing the design work for Phase B, and did the design work for Phase A.
Working with Miles is always entertaining. He brings a a certain life to a project that is undeniable.
Miles asked me to get some aerial photos of the site, and so I went over to Murrayfield Airport, found a guy with a helicopter, and convinced him to take me up in a helicopter. I rented a really high-resolution camera, and we flew around the waterfront of Eureka for hours, and I hung out of the helicopter and took pictures, and then came back and gave Miles a DVD of hundreds of pictures from a helicopter. It was really a highlight of my career to be able to fly around in a little tiny helicopter. The pilot was so close, and next to me was such a small helicopter that I actually had to move my knee out of the way every time he wanted to turn left. It was really fun.
All of the securing of consultants, even the permit writing, was done by our staff. So the staff here in Parks and Rec and the Community Services Department did all of the bidding, all of the consultant hiring, all of the bidding for the projects for construction, as well as took a lot of the information from the CEQA from those consultants and wrote all of the permits for the coastal development permits, the water quality certificates. All of those things were done in-house. I mean, it made it really efficient, and that's what I bring back to kind of not knowing what we're getting into. If you throw somebody in there and you make them figure it out, it ends up working, and pleading ignorance to people who know that you are ignorant kind of helps too. So one of the big hurdles for this project, and actually one of the things that made it really competitive for the grant applications, was the ability to cross underneath the 101 without having to encounter any traffic. In order to make that happen, the city had to partner with Caltrans and work on a easement and a maintenance agreement for the trail as it goes underneath the 101. So we worked with Caltrans. They're a great partner in this. They allowed us to get that easement and work on a maintenance agreement so that we could have the trail connect from the Target Trail, go underneath the 101 along the Shoreline RV Park, and come up to here along Tidd Street. It's been a huge benefit. It really connects the neighborhood up here as well as the Open Door Health Clinic in Silvercrest, so that all the people that visit their facilities have access to the trail and get access to the waterfront and some of our commercial areas without having to get in their vehicles.
In order to build the trail, we needed to complete demolition of a house that had been located on that last parcel of land for a number of years. It had been condemned, it had been burned, and yet getting rid of that thing was a nightmare. It took 2.5 years of concentrated effort, 3 contractors, and a whole lot of paperwork to get it out of the way so that we would be able to run the trail through the edge of that property. For us, the most successful development in getting this trail put in was the fact that we got to be a part of it. Instead of it getting routed around our property or next to our property, we were able to make it possible for the trail to come right through our property along the gully and have a much better exit than it would have otherwise.
We were very excited when the trail was going to tie into here and give us an opportunity to literally integrate it into the healthcare environment. We had been working on this already. We have perennials on this side of the clinic. On the other side of the clinic is our annual garden. We have teaching kitchens in each of our clinics so that the focus on wellness, which includes not just medicine, but also the outdoor activity and gardening and all of those other elements that sort of fit together, was our focus even before we knew that the trail opportunity was going to arise. And then Mike came along and in his unique way convinced us that we should give a permanent easement across our property, which is the full length of this property, to be able to do that, and we were not reluctant.
So as this section of the trail progressed, this is where we came into a big obstacle. There was a lot of encampments in this area. A lot of people are aware of the areas south of Del Norte Street being a real big issue for the city of Eureka. We have a big homeless problem. There was a boatload of encampments here. We started doing cleanups. Actually, we were doing cleanups for years back here, but you know, as of 2014, we were doing weekly cleanups back here, cleaning up anywhere between 3 to 4 40-yard dumpsters worth of trash from Del Norte down to the Parcel 4, which is some refer to as Devil's Playground. I used to come out here often to provide notifications to those people that were out here illegally camping. And one of the times when I came out here to notify somebody, came into a tent, knocked on the tent, Said, anybody here? I didn't see anybody. I looked in, and a person was in there. They had a gun in their hand, and you know, they were obviously protecting their property, but just kind of shows what it was like in this area here. Parcel 4, which is the Devil's Playground, was given to the city as a part of the Coastal Conservancy's grant of property, Palco Marsh, and those type of things to the city. The carrot for the city is that Parcel 4 is in a perfect location for coastal dependent industrial use, which is, you know, basically any sort of use that requires waterfront access. It was dredged, it had an industrial background, it was a perfect candidate for doing that. So the city took on all these other properties with the carrot being, hey, we're going to give you this 7-acre parcel to develop as coastal dependent industrial use. You can do with it what you want, make sure it happens. Well, city staff was working on a very long period of time, over a decade, of trying to find a coastal dependent industrial use for that. The Coastal Conservancy continued to push the city to find somebody to be there, and the city couldn't find somebody to be there. This was 1990s, early 2000s that all this was going on. They never found anybody. The Coastal Conservancy said, look, we can't be running this project in perpetuity. Because of your inability to get a coastal dependent industrial use here, we are going to put a open space easement on it and grant it to the Audubon Society. So while this property is zoned for coastal dependent industrial use, now it has an open space easement on it that's granted to the Audubon Society that completely conflicts with the use and pretty much trumps anything else. And so it really kind of changed the direction of what we would do with that property there. And you know, because of that fight and that conflict of not finding a use, it sat fallow and became one of the most blighted properties in all of Humboldt County, if not Northern California.
Well, they have a place down there called the Tombs, which is basically drying sheds from the old mill sites. And that was dubbed the Devil's Playground because of the small group of homeless that were associated with that area that were basically their own community and a lawless community.
Kind of concrete structures that were on the ground, and some of the people that were living back there would break into those structures, and it would serve as a good place to sleep. And so that is actually the area where the defendant who won the claim against the city fell.
So Kathleen Anderson injured her shoulder in the Palco Marsh. She's a homeless advocate who was showing a young couple that they could perhaps stay down there, and while she was down there she tripped, she shattered her shoulder. It was a really bad injury from what I understand. And she took the city to court about it, claiming that the city both knew that these kilns and this dangerous area was down there, and that they continued to allow people to visit down there. And so when she won that court battle, she got a settlement that she actually ended up translating into buying a house and putting up tiny houses in her backyard to let homeless people stay there, which is kind of interesting. And this resulted in the city's insurance agency being like, well, this can't go on, you can't have a bunch of people suing you and, continuing to win money in this, and so you need to do something about this, and that kind of put the onus on the city to take care of the kilns.
Staff went and looked at a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant, applied for it using this as a match. It requires a 50% match, and so the trail component provided the match for that money that removed the old concrete remnants from behind the mall.
I was there for the clean out of that, the cleaning out of the debris that was there, and I was there watching the demolition of it with heavy equipment, the wrecking balls, and then the product was sifted through. It went to a separator to remove the concrete from the rebar, and then all that product was used for the base of the trail. Watching the buildings go down, growing up here, we used to go back to there as kids. So you had the memories of having fun back there, the spray painting of the walls. But watching it be destroyed was actually a good feeling. I had a good feeling about it going, because it stopped the area for people to camp and live.
Well, it's been my experience working with the Eureka Police Department as long as I have, that there's always been somewhat of a population living along the waterfront area of Eureka and the Greenbelt areas. Back in '90, we've had several homicides down off of Vigo Street, which is north of the mall, and had different issues, something like that. But it was never really a big problem until about, I'd say latter part of 2000, and about 2006, 2007, and stuff had become more of an issue.
2010 and around 2010, that area there, in relation to the rest of the encampments, and that it was really considered a spot where, it was sketchy. I mean, people lived in the northern section of Palco Marsh and felt, that this was more of a community homeless encampment thing. The area that was to the south was really the, part where there was, a lot of calls for service, a lot of drug activity, a lot of violent crimes, those type of things that happened.
I talked to many people who did describe it as a community and who found a sense of community there. One of the interviews that sticks out for me is a woman who was living there with her daughter. And she had to go to work every day, so she had her partner looking after her daughter during the day in their tent. And initially they were at the very far end of this camp. They're closer to the Hikshari Trail, and she had picked that spot specifically because she felt safer there. And towards the inside of the camp, there is a spot that some people called, I don't know if this is fallacious or not, because I don't remember hearing it from a wide spectrum of people, but some people called it Heroin Alley. So she didn't want her kid anywhere near that spot. Her community was kind of on the outside where she felt safe, and there were people around her who she felt, were safe to be around. And so when things began changing and the Eureka Police Department started moving the camps closer together as part of the consolidation of things, she was really disturbed by this. She didn't want to be close to the heroin users or the more criminal element.
At one point during the process and preparing for the move out, we moved everybody into, or condensed the footprint of the marsh, made it easier for us to manage, easier for our officers to consider like a hot spot, get out and control that one area, and then make no camping zones in other areas. It was more manageable for us. It would not have been sustainable for a very long period of time when you take people who have such a high rate of drug addiction, mental health concerns, and you put them into a condensed area when they were already seeking isolation. That was one of the main things they wanted. You tend to find that the crimes go up and we have more incidents. So it worked for us for the time, but it did create some unique circumstances with a rise in crime and a rise in issues we had to deal with.
Crimes continued to escalate. There were stabbings, there were assaults, there were rampant theft from nearby businesses and retail locations, open market drug sales, prostitution, the list goes on and on.
All past 15 years, I've in and out in that area for 15 years, a.m., between 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., and walk through from the wastewater system parking lot all the way to the Delano Pier every morning. Gunshot, fighting, dogfight, pee and poop everywhere, garbage everywhere. You don't You don't see the image, but you smell it.
Oh, the encampments in Palco Marsh were a huge issue for our department. I mean, that's what we oversee. That's the open space down there that we address. It was extremely frustrating for myself as well as our staff when we would go down there. We didn't have bulletproof vests. We didn't have guns. We didn't have those type of things when we'd go down there. And we had significant concerns for our staff because, you know, they go down to the foot of Del Norte and they're supposed to be emptying trash cans and they got, you know, people threatening them. It wasn't just a homeless issue for us. There was a lot of criminal activity that was going on down there and a lot of safety issues for our staff. And
one of my earliest memories from when I first got here, I had to go down every Thursday and we cleaned up trash and other debris that were down there. We had 4 40-yard dumpsters that we filled every Thursday, along with whether it be pallets or trash or clothes or any debris that was unnecessary to be down there. But our biggest challenge is to safely, you know, because if you lift up a tarp or you lift up a pallet or a piece of carpet or a tent that had been abandoned, any of that stuff, you never knew exactly what you were going to find, along with buckets with urine and feces in it. And also there's some places that there weren't in buckets, so you had to be careful where you walk. And but it was a great accomplishment. I mean, I think we had 20, 30 of those 40-yard dumpsters down there that we filled up.
Well, I think the weekly cleanups were, particularly in Palco Marsh, behind the mall, other greenbelt areas, was just vital because trash builds up in a hurry when people are, in a sense, kind of living rough. And I think as it was, it's so easy for that to just totally get out of hand with, you know, syringe litter, dog and human waste products that were, you know, in those, again, kind of sensitive environmental areas. So it was just critically important that we be in there on a weekly basis, cleaning this up. City-owned property, we need to maintain our property.
We have partnered with the swap crew. So basically we were in there every week with a swap crew, an inmate crew, and that's where we were removing, you know, tons and tons of debris every week. Hundreds and hundreds of shopping carts. Obviously, lots of contraband and needles and things like that were found.
I went down there trying to convince the regional board to file an order against us because all of the human feces and other things that were going on down there into our bay, as well as some of the other water quality issues with them ripping up wetlands, cutting down trees, doing those type of things. We drive down there in a cop vehicle. It's me, the city manager, Shin Ree, and Roy O'Connor from the regional board. We're driving in a cop car. This was in, it had to be sometime in 2015, in a marked cop car, and we drive down there. We see a guy who's probably in his mid-20s. He's on a bicycle. He's got like 15 bike parts and is wielding a machete, driving in front of us. And you know, I have my background with police. If I was a kid and I saw that and I was doing it, I would have ran. He waved at us. So that was kind of the thing that was being bred, and I think that it was not only bad, it was worse for the people living down there than it was for, you know, the community as a whole. If you talk to some of the community members that were living in that area, it got to the point that because of this criminal element that there were certain areas that they knew not to go to.
Between the stabbings, the assaults that were taking place down there, often homeless person on homeless person, to the rampant theft at nearby retail locations, drug use, drug sales, great environmental damage. We just reached a tipping point where we had to make a change and return that public space back to really what it's intended to be, and that's a safe, secure place for everyone in our community to enjoy.
March 22nd, the city announced a definitive vacation date, which was May 2nd, 2016.
I talked a lot at council meetings about getting an exit date. We really needed to let people know that this is the date, a hard, fast date, because otherwise we're not gonna, people aren't gonna leave.
And there's several things that kind of led up to that. In the fall of 2015, the City Council approved a long-range property maintenance plan in which we really started saying, from a policy standpoint, it's not okay to bring construction materials and build, build encampments with concrete blocks and tires and wood pallets and all this. And then secondly, we also started kind of shrinking the area of where the encampments were. That they were so spread out, we really, as part of that, getting towards a future move-out date of trying to shrink the encampments. Also, though, trying to work with people to find them better housing options. And so by the time 30 days out from that May 2nd date, we sort of told people that this was a firm date. We started seeing people moving out of the area, so that by May 2nd, I think we were down to about 150 people. There was a lot of pre-planning that went into it, involving all city departments, and Captain Stevens from Eureka Police Department was really in charge of putting together kind of the big kind of enforcement part of the plan.
Leading up to the May 2nd evacuation, the services were a big part of that, making sure that all that had been done prior to that. And then when you had to look at it from a tactical standpoint, an operational standpoint to keep everybody safe. So we created contingency plans because we had gotten information that there was going to be almost like a Ruby Ridge event take place where they weren't going to leave the marsh, they were going to make some kind of stand, they had weapons. And having been out there and done the searches before, we knew they had access to weapons. So we went in and took overall photos from aerial photos. We marked the campsites, we knew exactly how many campsites there were. I broke those down into operational areas, and so we used the North 40 parking lot, which is the overflow parking lot for the Bayshore Mall, as our operations center. And moving from there, setting up the different operational zones so we could secure that area first. We went in and took large dumpsters that we knew we were going to put trash and other things in, and strategically placed them throughout the marsh and the trails, so no matter where we were, if an event took off, we would be able to use those to get back. It wasn't just the officers we had to be concerned about. We had reporters out there, we had city officials out there, Parks and Rec. We had observers, legal observers that were out there, a lot of the chaplains, other people that wanted to come down and be there and support the process and support the people that were still out there that we thought we'd find. We received assistance from the Coast Guard to do flyovers beforehand. We put an observer up there with them so we could see if there were any activities taking place before we actually put the officers in the marsh. There were quite a few fires set to camps and different things like that, but it was quite intensive. It was several weeks of planning. Had to be ran through the city council, and the city attorney and city manager signed off on it, and all in all it was worth it. We ended up only making one arrest over 3 days we were down there. The arrest had nothing to do with camping.
Really, my expectation going in was I thought we were going to be in for a difficult week, that you're always going to have people who, even though they've been told 30 days in advance, are not going to want to move. But what we experienced on the ground was, it ended up being a 2-day operation.
Ultimately, I thought it was a surprisingly successful and well-executed operation for the police department. They put a lot of thought into it, and I could tell it was well organized.
Operationally for us, it was no different than we did before on the weekly basis cleanups. The vacation day was just a longer period of time. On Parks and Rec and our harbor staff and our park staff worked with EPD and went out on a weekly basis for over a year doing the same thing. This was just more extensive and a lot more material removed and a lot more effort put forward.
We moved through roughly a half mile to a mile of property, dealt with 130 camps in 3 days, and really no injuries, no arrests to speak of, and it was just an incredible feat to watch everybody work together like that.
It was a hard day for me, actually, because I had, I'd befriended a lot of people out here that I really still care about. And so to see that whole process and to be a part of that was really challenging, because there were some people that they weren't willing to get the help, knowing that really they hadn't taken any of the support and they didn't really have anywhere to be. That was hard. And it was hard also, just coming out here, and because people couldn't come back in, so I was coming back in to get people's stuff for them, and that was hard, just going through their, having to get their stuff for them out of the tents and helping people carry their stuff out, and because they're human beings too, and yeah, it was though it was a really good thing, and it was positive for our city. on a personal level, it was a tough day. I can tell you that personally, I know a lot of people that have gotten out of here that are doing well, and it's such a courageous thing to be able to come from here and to go out and become productive members of society, you know, whatever that is, right? But like work and have a place and those kinds of things.
And I think some of the good things that came out of it was certainly the Betty's Container Village, which was a collaborative with called GCOP, and basically allowed for 40 people to have kind of temporary housing, typically up to 90 days as they're searching for more permanent housing jobs. And that project continues today, so it's been in operation, you know, over a year and a half.
We've worked with Betty Chin for years, you know, on helping the homeless and trying to get some of those people on their feet. So we were able to come up with a plan on one of our properties in Old Town to provide some interim safe housing for these people and get them out of the marshes, out of the areas, you know, out of the environmental sensitive areas where there was a lot of, you know, paraphernalia and things like that.
We built a shipping container village and only got 4 weeks and 2 days to take the project. And then when we start, I don't have employee, we don't have policy, I just take the people in, they need to go. They need to go, they have some place to go. And its overhaul is not a vaccine anything, more like a help for these people. Every single people come to our village, they had the physical medical care in the problem. They found out so much health problem. I think that's the best for this group, the people come out, and we serving over 300 people from Pauco Marsh come out to our village over the year. And right now they are much healthier. 40% of people got job. Before they don't have opportunity. And the most powerful for me was witness was when the first day moving in, when all the stuff, I talk about stuff. And then most for me, I still in my heart all the time, when I hand them a key, I said, that's your space, and they cry. Many people walking in that day, they never had a key. I still on my key is very powerful. And then I learned so much from them. And then they started to detach the homelessness lifestyle. They go on. The people, first group coming, the people still had a job, still had a house. So that's the beautiful. It's not because of Betty. That's because they had their own power want to change.
So this section of the trail here, we knew from the beginning, even when they did the Waterfront Trail and Promenades recommendations, that this was going to be the most insane part of the trail. When we first started going through it, I thought there was no way in hell the Coastal Commission would permit this portion of the trail, as we're directly over a very sensitive habitat, we're over a salt marsh. But we also knew at the same time that this would be by far and away the most picturesque part of the whole trail. When high tides come in, you're literally walking on water. It was a very expensive portion of the trail, but I can tell you it was well worth it. It has gotten a lot of good use. Even though it's not even open yet, it's been a huge success. After the vacation, the development of the trail and the other phases of the trail have been relatively painless.
There were some challenges with the boardwalk section.
Yeah, the bridges were, that was probably logistically the toughest thing.
In the third section of the trail, the most recent part where we're sitting right now, I got a call a couple of months ago, very near the end of construction, from Miles Slattery with the city of Eureka. And, you know, just in the way that Miles does, it was move the pipe!
Other than that, it's been really smooth sailing. It's been great to work with GHD. Mercer Frazier has been outstanding. I think they've really taken pride in this job.
So I really kind of gained a real appreciation for the waterfront, you know, from a different perspective. But I've seen over the years how it's kind of evolved, you know, and there's more and more people. The more these projects get built, the more accessibility it allows, you know, in each of its in its own way.
What we're trying to do with all of the interpretive signage, and are actually thinking about maybe replacing some of the signage on the Hikshari to help tell that story, is reaching out to all these different agencies and organizations so that we can get their input about what the history of the waterfront was.
Through a partnership with Redwood Community Action Agency and working closely with Denise Newman, who's amazing, we're going to have 20 interpretive panels and signs that will be sprinkled throughout the waterfront trail.
In 2014, I designed a series of panels for Palco Marsh, which interpreted topics ranging from Hammond's Bayside Mill to the restoration of the salt marsh, creating reconnectivity with Humboldt Bay.
Histories is what we're trying to get into throughout the whole 6.3 miles of the trail.
You know, over the years when we had our committee going, people would come periodically and they had suggestions for art on the trail. And that would be a whole nother level of enhancement.
We met with a steering committee a couple of years ago because there's been a desire to add more art throughout the waterfront trail. And that steering committee, we have applied for multiple grants. And luckily, last June, we were awarded the California Creative Communities Grant. And that gave the City of Eureka and the Ink People, we've been in partnership with Libby Maynard at the Ink People, and we have $90,000 to commission 8 artistic interpretive benches that will be sprinkled throughout the trail. And both the signage and the benches will be interpreting topics such as our fishing industry, our timber and railroad history, the rich culture of Eureka in general.
I think the community response to me dreaming this trail in my head for literally 2 decades, but starting to see it emerge after like 15 years was like, it's pretty surreal.
I came in here one day, even before the ribbon cutting, and I had a group of about 30 kids were going by on bicycles, multiple families, and just seeing the community use it and stop and read the interpretive signs and go, wow. And just, the excitement of embracing this as an amenity for the community is just its own gift.
People that come here, that use hotels, that are here for business, the trail gives them an opportunity to see the community in its best light, I think.
I think this trail transforms our community, not just Eureka, but all of Humboldt County. I'm looking forward to the trail going from, Mexico all the way to Canada, but this, to me, is an incredibly important and beautiful portion of that. It's a great place to run into people, to run, to take your family and enjoy everything that Eureka has to offer. It's you can convince your kids to come because you'll take a bike ride and end up with ice cream on the boardwalk, and it's just beautiful. I'm so grateful to all of the people who made this happen.
I think the recently completed Waterfront Trail is just a glorious gem for the city of Eureka and surrounding areas. It's going to be hooked up with Arcata and county-wide. I think it's just going to be an area that the entire county will be happy to use, and it's a great attraction for Eureka.
I'm loving the finished product. I love the views. They're always changing. Any type of weather, it'll be different. Just like some of the other sites around in the redwoods here, this Bayfront Trail, the Waterfront Trail, will be constantly changing depending upon the weather and the time of the year.
Well, the trail is important to the community, I believe, because it just provides so much more accessibility to a lot of areas that weren't really accessible, unless you're on a boat looking up to shore. But you even see it now before the trail was even open, how much usage it's getting from just bike riders and joggers and people, and you kind of walk around through those marshes and stuff on these trails and on the bridges. It really gives the community just so much more access.
Feel that people are comfortable with, but it's beautiful, well designed, using all the aluminum for crossing the creeks and sloughs and so forth is really nice. Won't have to worry about them rusting away.
I love the trail. I live in Eureka. I'm a homeowner in Eureka. I have a little dog. And right after it was finished, I took him down there to the foot of Del Norte Street, and we walked back past where I used to walk past all of the tents and camps and stuff. And, I was like, wow. This is a wetland. Like, I was looking at the restored, wetland area, all the little birds, and he also thought the birds were very interesting.
A program like the construction of the Waterfront Trail is so vital to Eureka because you essentially had this huge, underutilized, overly abused space in our city that was a source of crime and disorder and environmental damage and illegal dumping in our community. And it's a beautiful space along one of the most beautiful places on the face of this earth, Humboldt Bay. And the ability to take that space, clean it up, construct a trail that allows everyone to enjoy it and use it, whether it's someone without a house or somebody owns one of the biggest mansions in the city. I mean, everybody in between can use this space safely and freely. And I think that's a powerful statement for the community.
And I think with a trail system that is on the water is just very attractive to both from a amenity standpoint for those of us who live here as well as for tourists that come in.
It builds community in that we get out with each other in the great outdoors that we're so blessed with to have around here, and it also brings tourists and says, hey, come look at us, look at our bay, the second biggest bay in all of California to my understanding. So perfect. Days like this, look at how I'm dressed, huh? This is great. Middle of the winter.
Well, before this, we were walking in the neighborhood mostly around the VA, which is
on the streets.
Which is not as fun, not as pretty, and not as safe. So we really enjoy coming down and using the trail.
We all live in one of the most beautiful areas. We live in a place that people come to vacation.
I'm on the board of directors for the Six Rivers Running Club, and with the extension of this trail, we started a group run Monday afternoons. Anyone's welcome to join and to get people out using the trail. It opens up a lot of places that a lot of great views you can see that you normally wouldn't be able to see in a lot of parts of town that weren't previously accessible.
Good job, Eureka.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
The people that I meet come from all over the world, from Germany, from Croatia, from China, from Italy, from Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, anywhere that you can name, people come here to Eureka. It's a destination for people.
I was just reading Sunset Magazine the other day, and they were talking about places that people might want to live, and Eureka was mentioned. And in the article, one of the big points was the recently completed trail. I think nowadays families look for places to move where there are recreational opportunities, especially outdoors.
I think the key point is that everybody's always said, oh, the Coastal Commission, you're never going to do anything in here. Yeah, this is a trail, it's granola groovy, it provides nature viewing opportunities, but I think that showing the precedent of there is development on this waterfront and that there's future development that can happen. I think it can be a stimulus for more development on the waterfront, and I would hope that it definitely does that. It's definitely bringing more people to the waterfront.
Grateful to you guys in the city for documenting so many different voices about what it took to pull this thing off together. Because it took a village, and it took decades, it took a village, and the city's done it, and it's a gem that the likes of which few communities in Northern California have, and so I'm super proud of Eureka for making the Waterfront Trail a reality.
And the waterfront is a great place, because if you've never been to the waterfront, it's actually outstanding.